Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Advancement Podcast. Hey, if you enjoy what you're listening to, could you press subscribe? That way, every Tuesday and Thursday, you get the episodes right to your inbox. If you like what you're listening to, if you could go rate us, it helps us spread the word of what we're doing all over the podcasting platforms. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, if you could like or subscribe, that way you get the content as well, and we can keep this thing going. We've got new episodes for you every Tuesday and Thursday. My name is Todd. I'm the host of the Advancement Podcast, joined as always by the lead consultant of Advancement, Tim Ware. How you doing?
Bing, bada boom, bada bing, bada
How you doing,
boom.
Tim?
I'm doing well.
I know you're not sad, but I don't think baseball is going to get their head together.
Actually, if I do on my way into we do all our recording generally on Mondays. And on my way in, I do a live video. I call it my Monday musings.
Okay.
And today I said, professional sports should probably not come back in any way until after COVID until they get a vaccine, they get this thing fixed up.
Yeah.
Because everywhere they bring those guys together, somebody's always getting it. Football, you're not going to stay, they're not going to wear masks and stuff in football or basketball or baseball or soccer. The only sports that are probably safe are singles, tennis, and golf.
Probably. Or NASCAR.
I'm not even sure that is.
Okay. Well, I guess they got teams. Yeah.
Yeah. But those guys could wear masks, so maybe
Sure.
NASCAR.
Maybe.
But that's it. You just forget the spectators, and so
But is sports really sports without spectators? I mean, I know that's a whole nother conversation, but
probably not. But you know what? Here's what we'll find out. If those guys really are in it for the love of the game, or if they're in it for the money and for the fame.
I think we already know the answer to that question,
I think
Tim.
we do. So I think we do.
Which is why baseball has not begun to play yet.
And so I'm just, well, because the flip side of that is I on my Monday musings, I said, what if college sports was completely gone for the next year? What would happen if high school sports was gone for the next year? What would happen if little league sports was gone? You mean that family time and academics would become the preeminence for just 1 year?
What would we do?
What would we do? A little sarcasm there, huh?
Yeah. Because we got to protect those precious times for us, right?
Yeah. Well,
was that a good segue?
No,
that was a bad segue.
That was horrible. That was pitiful.
We're looking for a new host of the Advancement Podcast. You can apply at info@advancement.cc.
Yep. Okay.
So, we've done, this is the third of a 3-episode.
Talk about the call of God.
So we talked about who does God call, and what is a pastor's leadership responsibility.
Yeah.
The second was discovering and developing your calling. So if you haven't listened, you can go back and listen to those 2 episodes, because we're kind of building off of each other. And so today you want to talk a little bit about protecting the call of God in our lives.
Yeah, I have conversations all the time with leaders, and there's people want to quit, they don't know what to do, or they're under attack, and I think there really is something about this idea of protecting the call of God. We do have a responsibility for that. I think any pastor or any church leader or anybody who's pursued the dream of God in their heart. I knew a guy who felt like baseball, the Lord had told him that was what he was supposed to do. Now he was supposed to pursue that.
Yeah.
Now, and I say I knew him. I met him. This was a number of years ago, and he was AAA ball. He was AA at that time, headed to AAA the next year. And since we just talked about sports,
Yeah.
and in his environment and in that context, there's always moments to quit. Doesn't matter. There's going to be things that are going to happen. There's going to be people are going to say things. People are going to try and undercut you. No matter what happens, there are going to be moments where you are tired, where you just and some days you just don't like what you're doing. You don't like what God's asked you to do. How many times the pastor, what's the old
we
joke?
record on a Monday.
That's the old joke that every Monday, most pastors want to quit on Monday.
Never quit on a Monday.
That's right.
Just come and podcast. You won't want to quit.
So I mean, you're always going to get the opportunity to quit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and how many people do quit?
Man, if you look at the statistics, it's staggering.
On vocational ministry,
yeah.
They are staggering.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here and, I'm much, much younger than you, Tim. And my worry is once, your generation rides off into the sunset and really it's left to my generation and those below us, are we going to have enough ministers to do what God is asking us to do? And I'm genuinely worried about it. I mean, I know the Bible tells us not to worry, and I know God will handle it, but
I have concerns. If we look at the current state of the church in the United States and across the world, actually, we're not producing enough ministers to sustain the number of churches that we have.
And that's just as a pastor,
right?
That's not talking about staff, nothing.
Which is part of the frustration, because there are younger ministers who say, "Well, we'd like to step in."
Yeah.
But because of life expectancy, that we've got to have our friend back.
Mm-hmm.
I just lost her name.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our California friend.
Yeah, we need to have our friend back.
Yeah.
I just totally spaced.
If you're looking at me for names,
I totally spaced on her name to talk about this.
I've got names wrong on the podcast before.
To talk about the gerontology piece, but we have pastors that, because life expectancy is going longer. Susie, that's right. We've got people. That's right.
Continue, Tim. I'm sorry that I interrupted.
We've got people who, but there are young leaders who say, well, pastors who are now in the pulpit, they won't step aside and give us a chance. They won't find something to do in their twilight years, so they're not creating space for us. So we're losing ministers, not just on the top end, but we're not only is the crop less because we don't talk about the call of God and these types of things, but we're also, some of these guys are leaving the ministry world because I'll take my gifts and I'll go somewhere else,
right? Because
y'all won't make a space for me. And,
right.
And in some movements, doctrinally, there are some who we see that with women in ministry. We've seen that with people of different ethnicities. Well, if you don't want to make space for me, I'll go over here.
Yeah.
And that's a sad fact of what we're looking at, which is, again, we're wounding some of those young leaders. We're not just wounding. That's not just the wounds of those who've been down the road and had board members that beat them down. Or, I mean, the number of different stories where staff members have led revolts against or pulled the group out and we're going to go plant our own church, just whatever, all the different things. There are going to be wounds. There are going to be moments.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, Tim, if you take the past 18 months of my life,
the past 18 months
have been just dreadful. And I have the opportunity to lead what most people would call a healthy, growing church. It's what we all want, but even in that, I'm getting beat to death in some certain areas. I mean, if I wanted to quit this year, I would have had 5 or 6 opportunities to quit. So I guarantee there's guys listening out there that want to quit, that even as they're listening to us want to quit. What would you say to those guys that are like, listen, Tim, I don't know that I can put my family through this anymore?
Okay, number one, I would ask the question, so what's God asking you to do?
Yeah.
Because sometimes the wounds come because we've stayed too long in the same place.
Yeah.
All right, if we go back to the last episode, we talked about the person not wanting to step into what God's asking them to do, and sometimes we stay too long.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are moments of persecution. I mean, there are those Jeremiahs in the Bible, right? There are those Jeremiahs that God calls to take the heat for a long time in a circumstance, and I'm not saying just because when things get tough, you bail on this church or you go find something else to do, but I do think that there are times when sometimes we stay too long.
So you're saying some of our wounds are self-inflicted?
Some of our wounds come because are the result of fear of movement.
Okay.
So that faith versus fear piece. Sometimes there are wounds that are Christians are just sometimes mean.
Yeah.
If you're talking about in the church,
Sure.
In that context. But no matter what our call, there's going to be those moments where we're all going to have the moments where we want to quit. And this is where this is why those first two episodes of knowing what God's asking us to do and discovering that and having this being on this journey with the Lord becomes important, because when times are tough, I've got to know.
Yeah.
I've got to know. One thing, anytime I'm talking to a pastor or a leader in a church and they're talking about transition, I always ask the calling question, because I said, you've got to know what is Jesus asking you to do with your life.
Yeah.
If you can't, you've got to have some kind of anchor point, and that's an anchor point. Why did you get into this in the first place?
Right.
Now, I remember everybody, if you've been listening to these episodes, I spent 26 years in bivocational ministry before I became a vocational minister. And we were about to make the leap to becoming vocational ministers. I worked a six-figure job in the engineering construction world. I was doing well, and we felt like the Lord was asking us to leave all of that and move to the inner city. We were country people, and at that time we had a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Wow. Did you wear your cowboy boots in the inner city?
No, I didn't.
Good.
Anyway, so we were moving to the inner city, and we did. But part of what we did before that was we took time to fast and hear from the Lord, and we made our kids do it.
Yeah.
They had to fast with us. Now, their fast was different than ours. They were fasting video games. We were always a family fasting TV. And while they were home, they were fasting sugar, because I didn't want the teacher at school to not be able to give them a piece of candy if they'd done right, because they were kids. They were, they were first grader and first grader and a third grader. And so we're in that moment at the end of our fast time, and I said, what did Jesus say to y'all? Because I want to teach. This is a whole other piece, but teach my children to hear from the Lord. And it was a very, to shorten the story, my son at 7 years old says that we're supposed to move, because he said, the quote is, "I feel it in my heart."
Okay.
When we're in the inner city, and he's crying himself to sleep saying, "I want to go back home," we are able to say, "But do you remember what Jesus said to you?"
Right.
Because in the moments when we want to quit, we need to be able to go back to, this is what Jesus said.
Yeah.
And now, if what Jesus said doesn't work, then I have to ask the next question is, so when was I not listening to Jesus, and what did I miss?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think some of that goes down to, we have to understand that some of our wounds are self-inflicted. I've changed when I go through these hard times. I've changed my thought of, I used to ask God the question, "God, why are you doing this to me?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I ask
That's a
him,
violation of James.
Yeah.
Only good and perfect things.
Calm down, okay? God's working on me. But anyway, now I ask him, what are you trying to teach me in this? What are you trying to show me? What did I miss? What did I miss in this process? So
Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement.
Tim Ware has been a huge benefit and blessing to me personally as well as to my church. When Tim and I first connected in a coaching setting, my church was running in the 130 range. We now run 260, plus we have a really strong online audience. We went through a process of rebranding and changing our name, focusing on our vision, and shifting our culture in a lot of arenas. Tim was invaluable to talk us through that. He came out and met with our team. He was a huge, huge blessing. I highly, highly recommend Advancement.
Now let's get back to the podcast.
Unpack for us, Tim. How do we protect the call? What are some things, what are some practical steps that we can do in protecting the call and how we walk this out?
I think, first of all, don't go alone.
Okay.
When we look at the life of Jesus and this overarching call to go to the cross, to die and be resurrected, to sacrifice himself for the world, there's a couple of very significant moments.
Yeah.
One is Gethsemane.
Okay.
And he went into that. He knew that the night, this was going to be this is the moment to quit.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow it ain't going to be good after
for
that.
Tomorrow we die.
Right. And he takes the disciples with him. Now, they were useless. They fell asleep.
Yeah.
But he could have. Other times in his ministry, he went into the desert to be tempted, just him and the Holy Spirit. He went onto the mountainside to pray.
Yeah.
There were times where Jesus pulled away from everybody.
But not this time.
But not this time. In this moment where the greatest opportunity to quit, he didn't go alone. And so a lot of times when you're in a place where you feel to protect the call of God, and you've got to surround yourself with people.
Mm-hmm.
So people who will love you, who will pray for you, who will stand by you, who will defend you. I mean, eventually these guys stood up. Peter cuts off a guy's ear. People who are going to stand with you in those moments.
Yeah.
And so I think we talk about it all the time, or we not all the time, but we often talk about when we're talking about being a healthy leader, that we need never go alone. Don't go alone. Don't go alone. And I think that's the first thing. Who is in your circle of people when things get tough that's a confidant or a group of confidants that you can be honest with, that you can be real with, that you tell that you know that you can that will tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That will lovingly tell you the truth and help you process these things. So don't go alone.
Yeah.
Into the lion's den.
Yeah. So don't go alone. What are some other things we can do? Go. And are you talking about people around you in your church, or are you talking about people outside of your church?
Well, if we're talking about people who are just in vocational ministry, then I would say they need to be both. But I don't care where you are. They're probably both.
Okay.
If you're a believer and you're called to be a business leader or a doctor, you still need to have people who are probably in a vocational ministry piece as part of your reflective group.
Okay.
And then there are people maybe in your own profession who are other believers. Maybe, and sometimes I would even say that I have had times and moments in my life where the Lord, where the people that I was were not necessarily committed believers, but they still had wisdom.
Right.
And they still had good insights. I think another thing that I would tell you, and under this heading, there's a couple of things, but number one is live intentionally.
Okay.
When I'm hurt, when I'm wounded, when I'm tired, one of the hardest things for me to do is to get up and do my devotions in the morning and to spend time with the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm too sick. I don't care, Lord, in those moments. So the discipline of daily meeting with the Lord. protects. It also is the place where I get where the Lord refreshes my call.
Yeah.
So part of that is you're on, where I get that sense that I'm on track. It's that where I get that sense of of the shift. That's where I get the sense of the shift coming before I need to move, or I get the sense of drive a stake and hold on because the ride's fixing to get rough.
Yeah.
So those times become incredible. I would also say regular times of fasting. I don't care what you do, whether it's a teacher or a homemaker or a pastor or a college professor. If this is what God's asking you to do, I think that the discipline of regular fasting in our life is important.
Yeah.
I think it's also those are spiritual disciplines. I think there are also some natural disciplines.
Okay. Like what?
There are some times that we just say, if I do that, it's just not going to be good. Let's just be smart. I don't need to watch that movie.
Okay.
I don't need to listen to that song. I don't need to listen to that radio station. I don't
need to put myself in situations that frustrate me.
The life of Daniel is a great example of the protection of the call of God.
Yeah.
Here they are captive, and these young men, they're put in there, and he says, we're not going to eat that stuff. That's the stuff that you guys take to idols, and we're not going to do that. Oh, and then he has to bargain. Give us a week. Oh,
right.
Y'all are better because so. And then you go forward. You move forward, and he's, whether it be he ends up in the lion's den because he was praying, and someone attacks him. There are certain that those stories of Daniel are just really simple illustrations of protecting what God's doing in your life. I'm not going to quit doing certain things.
Yeah.
And there are some things I'm just going to say, I don't need that.
Yeah.
Is it necessarily bad? No. But for the sake of what Jesus is asking me to do, because I think sometimes that we underestimate how what we do affects the reputation of God.
Okay.
It's not, my protecting the calling is also protecting the reputation of God.
All right.
Because as a follower of Jesus, one of the big problems that we see, and I that sounds very that may be, anyway, one of the challenges we face in America.
I get what you mean. But yeah.
One of the challenges we face in America is that the unbelievers in our nation judge the entire church by a few people, by the actions of a few people,
by the vocal majority, which is actually minority.
Yeah. By this group of by a group of people. And when we're not trying to protect the reputation of Jesus, which means we have to protect the call of God. And that means that there are some things I just can't say. There are some things I can't put on my Twitter feed or my social media. That means there are some places I just can't go. It doesn't matter if it's not hurtful. Doesn't matter if it's not harmful. Doesn't matter if it's not sin. Sometimes it doesn't need to be sin. It's just not smart.
Sometimes we don't always need your opinion.
Sometimes we don't always need my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one. And then the last one is stay humble.
Okay.
And we talked about forcing the call of God in the last podcast. Usually when I start forcing the call of God is because I've decided, well, God, you told me what to do and I know how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's the push and pull of everything. As God gives you more you see more success in what God's asked you to do, the bent is to try to do it on your own. Well, because I got here, but no, it's a constant push and pull. God brought you there, so you need to rely on him even more to take you to the next thing. And I think for me, it's a constant push and pull.
Well, I think there's even a challenge in the way we phrase some of these things that we, that pulls away
My
from
wife
humility.
is always on that.
Well, I mean, this is my calling.
Yeah.
Oh, no. This is what God called you to do.
Yeah.
It's not his call on your life.
Yeah.
It's not your calling.
Right.
It's not your church. It's his church. How many pastors dwell at my church?
Yeah.
My people. So when did the congregation become your people?
Yeah.
These are Jesus's people.
Are you talking to my wife?
No.
She yells at me all the time about this stuff.
Well, I do. I think these are. And I'm not saying that that's always somebody's heart, because some of it's just language in the circles that we run. But I think that
sometimes it's just you talking to your spouse.
True. But I do think that sometimes we have to be very careful, because language does matter. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so part of this for us is we have to we really trust that this is God's thing. Proverbs, again, it says, Proverbs 15, it says that humility comes before honor. And sometimes we want, and it's the brokenness of humanity that we want the honor.
Yeah.
Look what I did, God. Now I did it for you, but look what I did. Yeah. Look what I did for God.
Yeah. Look how amazing I am working for the Lord.
Look at the size of my church.
Yeah.
Did you hear the message I preached?
Yeah.
Look at it. Look how good I can hit a baseball.
Yeah.
And in today's world, honestly, social media accentuates pride, because it becomes all about me.
Right.
It becomes about building a platform. Honestly, one of the great struggles that I have with the podcast, the internal struggle I always have, is that everybody says, when you read how do you build an audience? You got to build a platform.
Yeah.
The reason that when we started this minute, it's very common, and if you're a pastor listening and you've done this, I'm not judging, but it's very common for you to have a Tim Ware Ministries, timware.com, and we were this was a big deal to Rachel and I, that we were not going to, when we were looking, we felt like the Lord was asking us to move this direction. That's why we said advancement. We're not going to, it's not us.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't die with us.
Yeah.
This is God's thing, not our thing.
Yeah.
And so we struggle.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons we struggle with being good at social media, because we wrestle with humility.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we're good at it, because anybody that knows me knows that I have a deep streak of arrogance that I fight all the time.
Sure.
But this is the battle of trying to protect the call of God.
Yeah.
All right. So what's your takeaway?
Well,
all right, let me get in the mic and say, so what's your takeaway, Todd?
Yeah, that's good. So sometimes, a few things. Sometimes our wounds are self-inflicted. You need people to love you and tell you what you need to hear, and not always what you want to hear. And then
that one's hard.
That's tough. But without those people, I probably would not have made some of the calls that I've needed to make through my life. Which all it would have done is just make the end worse than what it could have been. And then you have to refresh your calling in your devotional time.
Yeah.
Our former superintendent, now assistant general superintendent, told a group of us one time.
He's talking to. You're talking about. But you're talking about in the Assemblies of God.
For those of us that are not Assemblies of God. Yeah. He said he never had to talk. He's never had to do a disciplinary measure with a pastor. Everyone that he's talked to, from a discipline standpoint, they have laxed in their devotional time. He had never talked to someone that had a strong devotional time that he was having to do a disciplinary measure on. There was always a lax in that department. And that's always stuck with me.
Yeah. I think so. I think it's important that we realize that, for me, a key in this protecting the call of God is that we're protecting his calling,
Right.
not our calling, that we're protecting his reputation.
Right.
Jesus' reputation is stellar, but how I handle it is where the problem arises.
Very true.
Yeah. All right.
Good job, Tim.
See you next time on the Advancement Podcast.
All right.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.